China represents an enormous human rights challenge, in part through its domestic practices, because it still is doing everything it can to prevent the emergence of any kind of organized political opposition. So while there's been tremendous evolution in China and tremendous growth in what you might call personal freedom, today people do have the right to choose where they work, where they live, where they send their kids to school. There's much greater personal freedom. But when it comes to political freedom, there still is very little. You can speak out in certain circumstances, but anything you do that begins to look like organized opposition is likely to face a government reaction. So expanding the scope of civil society in China is an enormous challenge. And because China is so big and thus so immune to some of the traditional forms of pressure, it's a particular challenge. But the other challenge that China presents is in its foreign policy, because China today is looking foremost for natural resources to fuel its economic growth. And it, because it is so sensitive about people interfering in its domestic affairs, it has adopted an ideology in its dealings with other countries of non-interference. So it will enter into contracts to purchase oil or to explore for minerals with so-called no strings attached. It will make these purchases or enter into contracts without regard to the conduct of its partner government. And the result of that is it tends to undermine pressure being exerted by the World Bank or the IMF or Western governments to try to improve the practices of some of these governments, whether it's in the area of corruption or in the area of repression. And so you take a country like Sudan, where China has been the principal purchaser of Sudanese oil. And while Western governments have slowly pulled out of Sudan because they don't want to be underwriting the slaughter in Darfur, China has gone in and bought away, and indeed for a long time was fighting off pressure to being put on Khartoum to stop the murder in Darfur. Now that has slowly begun to change, and this is one place where I am guardedly optimistic, because China seems increasingly not to want to be seen as the supporter of thugs and murderers around the world.